Hello and welcome back to the overview of the Indie Charity Bundle for Accessibility in TTRPGs, funding DOTS-RPG. Last time we went over the full system core books, and it was about an hour and a half. I could have shortened that, but, I'm not exactly the best at making videos like these. Moving on to now toolkits and supplements. We're actually going to be taking only going to be taking a look at some of these to try and help streamline things. A lot of them, the summary works decently well, I think. The Fate Accessibility Toolkit. It's Fate-compatible tools for accessibility. So that's definitely worth checking out. It's not available for free right now. It will be when the bundle launches on June 24th. So you can't just download it now and take a look at it if you want, but you can buy it. And, I think any kind of accessibility toolkit, especially for such a well-known system, is something that should be supported. So I encourage you to buy this as well if you would like. But that is what that is. Arvin, the Land of Dragons, is a supplement for Dice and Glory. Since we already went over Dice and Glory, I think I'll skip that one. Tales from Beyond is a collection of short stories for Chains of Galia, which is sort of a Dark Souls-inspired system with evil and dark and light gods that have sort of begun changing the form of the people of the setting. It's all rather grim and gothic and interesting. So if any of that sounds cool to you, definitely keep Tales from the Beyond in mind, as well as Chains of Galia itself. Moving on to the things I am going to be looking at. We have Clutch Decisions, which is a tool for GMs to randomly generate road paths and how those curves and hazards impact chases, which I think is a very interesting tool I haven't seen exist natively in any system, so I think that's a good one to check out. Shattered Skies is a system agnostic setting of floating islands and political intrigue. It's also one of the most professional looking for the scale that it is. Projects on the list, it's laid out more or less exactly what you would expect a supplement for a bigger system to be, and there's a lot of, I think, high quality art, though I'm certainly not the best judge of art. You can see some of it right there. And the last one we'll be taking a look at is Welcome to Accro Prime, the Nightlife, which is an in-character summary of hotspots in a dystopian system for the Prosperon system specifically, or any sci-fi sort of base system. Prosperon, the system itself, wasn't submitted to the bundle, but this supplement can certainly act as a standalone thing. Starting out, we will be looking at Clutch Decisions. The first toolkit we're looking at is Clutch Decisions, which is a system-agnostic road generation system. Now, I guess maybe not system, but tool, like I, said. Road generation is sort of the basis of it. And this notation is relatively important because it'll be used throughout the book, but basically everything is either a left turn or a right turn, and then there's a severity of the direction. 6 is an almost straight line, whereas 1 is a very sharp turn. Yeah. Dangerous elements can appear. An exclamation point will indicate that. And sort of crest or jump can occur too. And that's sort of the basic gist of it. It's intended for either generating a road that you're going to use later, and you want a sort of realistic looking one where it's not really straight all the time. And it might be used for a chase or for an action sequence or something like that. Or if you're doing an active chase, you can actually roll in real time to see what's coming up next. Yeah, you roll 2d6. And the first d6 will give you how sharp the turn is. The second d6 will give you how many, whatever they call it, crests or dips it might have. And then if it's odd, it turns left. If it's even, it turns right. Yeah, and then if you get 3 turns in the same direction, it's opposite but dangerous. So you can get something that curves right twice or left twice, but if it starts to curve in the same direction the same time based on a roll, which I wouldn't know what percentage chance there is of that really, but it's a bit less than 50%. Probably not too low on the other hand. If you get that third turn in the same direction, it will change into a dangerous turn in the opposite direction. So that, randomly dangerous features get thrown in, but also you can't just have a road that, goes in a circle randomly. Yeah. Okay, if your RFN is a 1 or a 6, the corner is going over a crest. So, okay, road feature number. So it's the 1d6 being even or odd that tells you which direction it turns, and if it's a 1 or 6, there's a crest. Yeah, and so even though there is 1 to 6 possibilities for how sharp a turn is, and that's apparently based on some sort of real-life notation system, you can do different die rolls to simulate different. Yeah, instead of just rolling a 1d6 for the rank, you can roll different die rolls to simulate different kinds of areas. Like if you use a 1d4 or 2d6 and keep the lowest for your rank die, that simulates mountains, roads, or any other environment with a lot of turns. If you do 2d6 and keep the highest, that's open and faster, straighter roads. And then if you do a d8, 7 and 8 are totally straight lines that go for a certain distance. And you can obviously experiment with what kind of die you use to get different probabilities for the 1d6 result or 1 to 6 result. A road feature die can be any die. If you use and then the bigger the die, the less crests and jumps there would be. Let me see if I can remember how the sort of end system works for this. Yeah, okay, I think what's that supposed to mean is that it'll always be generated on either a 1 or the highest number on that die. So depending on the die you pick, you'll get more often. Like if you use a 1d4, 50% of the time you're going to get a crest or jump. If you use a 1d6 as a suggestion, it's going to be 2 out of 3 times on a 1 or a 6 instead of 50% on a 1 or a 4. If you do a 1d10, it's like a 1 in 5 chance on a 1 or a 10, so you get the idea there. And like we said, if you get the same direction 3 times in a row, it's instead the opposite direction but dangerous. That lets you get dangerous turns while, not just curving in the same direction all the time. Yeah, and instead you can drive it dramatically up to any time the current direction would repeat. And that makes it more dangerous, but also a sort of quicker ride to your location because it can't take as many detours. Alright, comments on features. Yeah, so you can add a penalty or raise the difficulty level for a dangerous corner. And if you decide that in general driving through a left turn 3 of 3 current severity, you need to roll a d10 above 5, then driving through an L3 exclamation mark would require you to roll above 6 instead. So it's letting you sort of set the difficulty yourself because every system is going to be different. I will say, from what I remember of this, and again, all these PDFs might be a little outdated, but from what I remember of this, you don't usually have to make a check on every turn. This kind of makes it sound like you do, but most of the time, you don't make any check unless you're driving fast, if I recall. Yeah, these additional mechanical effects are intended to be used with a time trial subset or any similar approximation of speed in your base rule set. It is the case for obstacles that modify your capacity to accelerate or slow down. So basically, you can get through pretty much anything generated here as long as you're driving slowly, but there are various situations where you might not want to be. So here's a description in some of the dangerous features and how they might result if you fail. Yeah, and here we get into some of the more complicated stuff for examples of play. But like all the systems I'm looking at, I'm not going to go into too much depth. I'm just sort of showing you the highlights. For this one, I kind of just played it straight because I think showing you the base mechanic will tell you all you need to know about whether this is something that interests you. Yeah, there's a way to change how crests are generated, and they may or may not have any issues depending on speed. Like if a crest hides the road ahead, which is important, but if you're going slowly, it doesn't have any additional effects. If you're going quicker, there might be an additional effect on the difficulty. If you're going very fast, then it might have an even bigger effect on the difficulty. And then we get into some of the more optional stuff. I'm going to see if I can double check. Yeah, you could also just generate roads to fill out a map. But I want to double check on how difficulty works. And here's some more on how the difficulties matter generally. And like I said, I believe it says you might not have to bother with difficulty for turns at all if people are not going fast, but I can't quite fully recall. And that's honestly something that you can modify yourself as the GM easily enough. But that's more or less it for clutch decisions. It's got, a decent, I think, base mechanic for generating roads and turns and possible dangers. And then there's a bit more extra stuff that helps you use the mechanic in different ways. So, if you ever need to generate a road, I think this is a pretty good way to do it. And that's about the gist of it. Unleash yourself on the imaginary roads, but please be careful on the real ones. Alright, next we're taking a look at Welcome to Accro Prime, the Nightlife. This is sort of a setting information packet for a system called, if I remember right, Prosperon. Yeah, there you go. That helps right there. That they didn't feel like submitting the full system, or didn't choose to submit the full system to the bundle at this time, but they did generously provide this supplement. And I think, sort of going back to main features and highlights, the highlight of this for me, one of the highlights anyway, is that the writer, the character that is writing the supplement, is a reporter and has a very strong voice in a lot of the writings. So it's an in-character discussion of the setting instead of something more dry. And it's not really mechanics-based, but something to give you an idea of what the world is like and what life is like in the setting. I'm gonna go to the one of these that I think I enjoyed the most. And even though I talked about sort of the voice that comes through, I would say that there isn't quite as much of the voice of the character narrating all of this, who is a reporter that sort of had, I think, slight high-class connections to their parents, but kind of rejected them or something along those lines. This portion doesn't have as much about them, or this isn't even the one I want. Doesn't have as much about them, and it doesn't really have information on like a main NPC as much like a lot of these entries do, but I do kind of like it overall, because I think it's got some very vivid descriptions. The Summit Spire Park. I loved this place as a kid, and though I haven't been there in a few years, I stay hip to all the new buzz surrounding the exciting rides that have been brought in over the years. Interesting fact, Summit Spire Park was actually the brainchild of an engineering mastermind by the name of Remus Johann Ranowski. He worked for Planetary Extreme as an aerospace engineer, but wanted to express his love of wild and crazy rides, so he gathered the support of major investors with the promise of mass profits, which he delivered. But that's not why he made the park. He wanted to push the boundaries of wild and crazy thrill rides. The place is built into the biggest city park in the Silver Corridor, called the Sylphan Grove, which weaves in and out of the upper tiers of the city. The park is so big that the Summit Spire Park takes up only a small portion of it, stretching across the city skyline. It's the kind of place that feels alive the moment you step inside, like the air itself is humming with anticipation. The towers grow faintly in the distance as if they've borrowed light from the stars, and pathways curl through the garden that seem to breathe when you walk past. You don't really notice the rides at first. They're folded into the landscape, rising and falling like waves, carrying people through skies that change color within the hour. Music drifts from somewhere unseen, blending with laughter, and every corner feels like it's waiting to surprise you, whether it's a hidden grove that glows at night, or a plaza where strangers gather under a sky that never looks the same twice. It isn't the same feeling other places give you when you think of Accro Prime. It's about wonder, about stepping into a place that makes you feel like the world is bigger, brighter, and more possible than you remembered. That's how I felt when I was a kid at that place. Bring your crew here even as adults, and I promise you'll leave with a smile on your face. You have to check out the classic ride, the Orbiter. If you don't have the stomach for it, I would pass, though. So, another thing I think is nice is sort of they reference the sort of tone the place might have if you bring a party there, even though it doesn't really have specifics on what this place is supposed to be like mechanic-wise. It's something that both players and a GM can read. It sort of sets the tone of the area and gives you a little plot hook to interact with them. A lot of the other entries have interesting NPCs that they go pretty much into depth on, but I thought sort of the description of the area was a little more interesting, especially since it's different than the sort of more dystopian-focused sci-fi stuff this setting usually has. It's a nice change of pace. So, if you enjoyed the way that was written, I've just looking at something to give you some ideas for locations for a sci-fi city is, I think this is definitely great to check out. Alright, now we're taking a look at Shattered Skies, which, has a few standout things about it. I haven't looked at it quite as closely as the more mechanics-based systems, because I try to focus on those when I'm vetting stuff to make sure everything functions the way it's supposed to, or just functions on a basic level. When it's basically all setting information like this one, there's a few tables and detailed stat blocks, but when it's pretty much all setting information, I'm not too worried about really going over it in depth, just seeing if some of the writing's good. So some of the stuff I might be looking at, we could be discovering together here. I think I already started to say this, then got sort of sidetracked, but one of the big highlights of this book, I think, is the visuals. You've got a lot of art in the layout for all the text. Looks fairly professional. And you've got big pictures. You've got, starting out with geography, headings, subheadings, bolded words for any of the terms. Everything just looks easy to read to me and nicely laid out. Now, this is a little more amateurish looking, maybe, but I like that. It gives you a feel for that this really is just someone's project, or a group of people's project, and not really, something that has a huge amount of backing behind it. It's still got a lot of character and personal touch in it. Now, another thing that I thought was interesting about this was, even though it is it's a sort of skyborn setting, you expect adventure in those, mystery, maybe some whimsy, but it actually seems like there's also a lot of political intrigue and opposition in this one, and sort of sometimes regressive societies, which is a little not what you would expect for the basic, cliches of a kind of floating land-based setting. So I think that's a very interesting direction to take it in. Yeah, fierce and fragmented people. They split up into a large number of clans after being freed. Entering a mine unarmed is bad luck, wasting heat, wearing dynasty's colors, speaking the emperor's name even, refusing to share a fire, eating in silence. Interesting. It's a very clearly communal, but at the same time kind of hostile, and the different communities sort of have a lot of infighting from time to time. Let me go over in more detail. Scarred by heat, blinded by the strong sunlight as they escaped to the depths, and hardened by suffering, hard labor, and the cruelty of their oppressors, the Ashbourne staged a great rebellion, taking advantage of the dynasty's weaknesses during the Civil War, gaining their long-sought freedom with blood. They reject any ideology, religion, or authority that would claim power over them. The sun itself is a cruel symbol, a symbol of their torment. They despise empire, I don't know what the two asterisks are for, and the wandering court in equal measure, whom they see as heirs to the same oppressive bloodline. Ashbourne value freedom above all else, heavily rely on trade with republics, and their dependence fosters a fierce hatred of raiders, especially in the case of the corsairs, to whom they show no mercy and reserve bloody public executions that can last for days. So, that's sort of what I was talking about, where it's a lot more of a harsh setting than you might expect. The world of shattered skies. Yeah. The world of shattered skies is composed of floating land masses suspended in the sky, divided into 4 concentric belts, each further from the Zun Velitae, the central star, Starheart, or Zun in the common parlance. I suppose it's a little weird to be going over what the system is after I've already went over some of the details, but I just wanted to show, how this might be a bit different than you'd expect. Between the islands are vast gulfs of sky, some turbulent and ridden with storms, others eerily calm, usually referred to simply as the skies. Gravity is inconsistent and influenced by anomalies brought by the Zun instability, making navigation and survival treacherous. Yes, here there's a shattered moon. Each island has its own gravity, biosphere, and environment. Some are deserted and desolate rocks. Others are home to dense and intricate jungles, and still others have bodies of water full of life. So I think it's a very interesting setting with a lot of variety. It has a whole, sort of sun thing and some gravity stuff going on, and even though it's in the sky rather than in space, so there's a sort of interesting mishmash of, sort of archetypal environments. On the one hand, you've got the floating island element. On the other hand, you've kind of got almost a space element going on, even though it's not really in space. Like there's belts and orbits and shattered moons and all of this. So I think gives a nice overview and sort of some of the standouts. I'm going to just look in this table of contents to see something else that I should throw in. I think I want to take a look at some of the tables if I can. There's a bestiary at least. Yeah, generating skies. That's probably going to be pretty vital if you're going to engage with this. But I think I'm going to focus on bestiary on 68, and yeah, I'll check out the generating the skies one up. That's on 111. Going to 68. I'm trying to spend a bit more time on this one than the other toolkit, since it's certainly more expansive. Okay, 68. Storm jelly, luminous jellyfish. Now that's size, I'm guessing, damage, arm, unarmored, pack size. This is relatively setting agnostics, but like a lot of the bigger, setting books, I would expect that it's based on a specific system, or in some portions, mechanics of its own. That's kind of something you have to do if you're making a big setting book. You can't have things be fully plug-in-able to any system at all without a little bit of work. Yeah, there's a sensory description, which is fun, that they go for more than just sight. Treasures it can drop, layer features, encounters, peculiar traits. All of this looks very fun. And it doesn't look like they, I said it was probably designed around a specific system. You get -2 speed and -1 hit, but it does look like they leave things like damage kind of open for this, which makes sense. Maybe I'm just misreading it. So that's something to keep in mind. Let me scroll down and see if I can find something big. Maybe I can look at the top of the bestiary and just see if they tell you how to use damage and stuff. Hard to say. I'll move on to 111. Definitely a lot of cool creatures in here I think we've seen. Not entirely sure how you would implement it in a system, sort of quote-unquote CR-wise, but because I don't think damage is listed here explicitly. But maybe there's so as pickaxe, I'm assuming if you go to the equipment, it tells you sort of the damage range of a pickaxe, and you kind of figure it out from that. But, that may be something you'll have to discover on your own. Okay, moving on to 111. Now, I could figure it out, but I kind of feel like for this, just exploring things and wandering through the book is a little more interesting to highlight it. The Shattered Skies, Exploration and Discovery. Yeah, you can procedurally generate the environments. I'm guessing that is more for stuff in the sky and not like some of the more bespoke islands, but it might all be intended to be procedurally generated. I couldn't tell you at this point. And distance from the sun, island density, altitude tiers, and there are different types and the various kinds of belts. Carnivorous plants. So it's like you would roll 1d6 for the biome and then 1d6 for a feature of the biome, or maybe multiple. Like you get a jungle, and one of the focuses could be giant insect nests or carnivorous plants or just a giant tree. With various island sizes. And you can generate landmarks, you can generate secrets. Exploration, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff that all looks very well thought out. I am kind of curious if there are like fully mapped out islands, so I'm going to check that. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in here there were some, at least example islands, but I couldn't really tell you. Just looking off the table of contents, but that's sort of a brief exploration of Shattered Skies. I think the highlight for me is the layout and all the images and sort of the twists on what you would expect for this standard kind of setting where it's sky islands, but it's also kind of spacey, and a lot of the people seem to have very combative vibes to them, or they're not really just soft, whimsical sky people. There's actual intrigue and factions and conflicts all going on. So that's a quick look at Shattered Skies.